Cuba has the right to buy fuel from any country willing to sell it. That was Bruno Rodriguez, Cuba's foreign minister, speaking calmly on January 11th, 2026, just hours after Trump issued his latest ultimatum threatening to cut Cuba off from all oil supplies completely. No more oil, no more money, zero. Make a deal now before it's too late. Trump believed economic starvation would force Havana to collapse within weeks. Intelligence assessments predicted immediate surrender. American analysts insisted Cuba had no alternatives. That assumption shattered almost instantly. While Trump cut off Venezuelan supply routes expecting swift capitulation, Cuba looked outward and found willing partners. While Washington celebrated Maduro's capture thinking Havana would fold, Mexico quietly stepped forward, offering commercial crude at market rates. While Trump issued threats in capital letters on Truth Social, Canada was already calculating exactly what Cuba needed and how Ottawa could provide it without political strings attached. The shock is total. American coercion strategy just collapsed. Cuba did not surrender. Instead, Havana demonstrated that energy relationships can function without ultimatums, that sovereign nations maintain the right to purchase fuel from any seller, and that reliability now matters more than proximity. Today, we're showing you exactly how Trump's Cuba oil blockade backfired spectacularly, how Trump shut down 26,500 barrels per day from Venezuela thinking Cuba would collapse, how Mexico immediately provided alternative supply, preventing total grid failure, how Canada positioned itself as the long-term reliable supplier Cuba desperately needs, how 13,000 barrels per day represents exactly the volume Canada can deliver without blinking, how Canadian energy exports have continued through every political storm, proving consistency that Cuba now values above everything, and how Trump's weaponization of energy access pushed Havana toward partners who separate commerce from coercion. But before we dive in, if you appreciate analysis that goes beyond headlines, hit that subscribe button and join us for stories that truly matter. January 3rd, 2026. United States military forces conducted operation in Venezuela, resulting in Nicolas Maduro's arrest. This was not diplomatic intervention. This was not negotiated transition. This was direct military action. 32 Cuban military and intelligence personnel stationed in Caracas for security cooperation were killed during the operation. The immediate consequence was brutal and precise. Venezuelan oil shipments to Cuba stopped instantly. 26,500 barrels per day disappeared overnight. Half of Cuba's oil deficit vanished in a single moment. Cuba imports approximately 60,000 barrels daily to keep lights on, transportation moving, hospitals functioning, basic economic activity continuing. Venezuela supplied 26,500 of those barrels under preferential payment terms, allowing Cuba to maintain basic economic function despite decades of American sanctions. That lifeline severed. Simultaneously, Washington entered negotiations with Caracas over $2 billion arrangement involving 50 million barrels of Venezuelan crude, not to stabilize Venezuela's economy, not to support Venezuelan people, to reroute oil to American refineries while placing revenue under United States Treasury supervision. This was precision economic warfare. Capture the president, redirect the oil, control the money, starve the ally. Washington calculated Cuba would break within 2 weeks. Blackouts would intensify beyond current levels. Transportation would halt completely. Public frustration would explode into protests. Government would face impossible choice: comply with American demands or watch country descend into chaos. Trump's team decided this was moment to maximize pressure, apply maximum force while Cuba is most vulnerable, extract maximum concessions while Havana scrambles. Within hours of Maduro's capture, Trump posted to Truth Social. Message was unmistakable. No more oil, no more money, zero. Suggestion to make deal before too late carried implicit threat. Submit now or suffer complete economic collapse. Clock is ticking. Options are narrowing. Resistance is futile. American intelligence community provided supporting assessment leaked to demonstrate confidence in strategy. Cuba faces strain. Agriculture struggling. Tourism sector weak. Loss of Venezuelan support makes governance harder. Grid blackouts frequent. Economic pressures mounting. Population frustrated. Government isolated. But assessment used careful language that strategic planners should have noticed. Cuba could face greater difficulty. Could, not must. Not will, not inevitable. That conditional phrasing revealed critical reality intelligence analysts understood, but policymakers ignored. Havana has options, is actively pursuing them, can survive this pressure if alternatives materialize quickly enough. Trump's team ignored that nuance, saw what they wanted to see, assumed strain equals surrender, assumed difficulty equals collapse, assumed pressure guarantees compliance. All assumptions spectacularly wrong. Bruno Rodriguez responded within hours. Statement was calm, measured, strategic. No panic, no emotional defiance, no desperate pleading, just simple assertion of sovereignty. Cuba has right to buy fuel from any country willing to sell it. This was not rhetoric. This was statement of commercial fact and diplomatic principle. Behind that public statement, Havana was already executing contingency plans developed precisely for this scenario. Cuban officials understood for years that Venezuelan supply could disappear. Political instability in Caracas created vulnerability. American pressure on Maduro threatened arrangement. Sanctions targeting oil sector made logistics complex. Smart governments prepare alternatives. Cuba prepared. First call went to Mexico City, not asking for rescue, not begging for charity, asking about commercial terms for crude oil purchases at standard market rates. Can Mexico supply? What volumes available? What pricing structures? What delivery timelines? What payment methods accepted? Professional commercial inquiry between sovereign trading partners. Second call went to Ottawa, longer conversation, deeper strategic discussion. What volume can Canada supply long-term? What pricing mechanisms work? What payment terms are flexible? What timeline for first delivery? How reliable is supply chain? Will politics interfere with commercial arrangements? That last question mattered most. Cuba has been burned by political supply relationships before. Needs commercial partner whose government won't weaponize energy access. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum responded quickly, confirmed publicly that Mexico had become important crude supplier to Cuba. Volumes were not massive. Mexico cannot replace entire Venezuelan supply. Mexican domestic needs take priority. Export capacity has limits. But Mexico provided critical bridge, kept some oil flowing during crisis moment, prevented total grid collapse, demonstrated that commercial relationships can function normally even when Washington disapproves. Mexico sold oil to Cuba. Cuba paid market price. Transaction occurred. No drama, no crisis. No political interference from Sheinbaum government, despite American pressure to maintain isolation. No ultimatums attached, no policy demands, no sovereignty violations, just normal trade between sovereign nations. Exactly what Havana needed to stabilize immediate crisis. But Mexico alone insufficient for long-term solution. Mexico providing approximately 13,500 barrels daily. Helpful, but not enough. Cuba still faces 13,000 barrel daily shortfall. Gap must close or blackouts intensify. Transportation suffers. Economic function deteriorates. Government faces mounting pressure. Cuba needs reliable supplier capable of delivering that remaining 13,000 barrels daily consistently over years, not weeks. That supplier exists, has capacity, has experience, has proven track record of reliability through political chaos. Canada. Canadian oil production exceeds 5 million barrels daily, among top 10 global producers. Vast majority exported because domestic consumption much smaller than production. Infrastructure exists. Pipelines connect production regions to export terminals. Refining capacity proven. Export terminals operational on both Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Experience shipping to diverse global markets established over decades. Canada exports crude to United States, Europe, Asia, multiple smaller markets. Adding Cuba to customer list represents minor logistical adjustment requiring minimal new infrastructure investment. 13,000 barrels per day is tiny fraction of Canadian output, less than 1/4% of total production. Volume so small it would barely register in national energy statistics. Rounding error in monthly export reports. But for Cuba, 13,000 barrels daily means grid stability, means transportation continues operating, means hospitals maintain power, means economic function persists, means sovereignty survives American pressure. Scale matters differently depending on perspective. For Canada, negligible volume easily accommodated within existing export capacity. For Cuba, difference between national survival and collapse. That is leverage, but not the weaponized kind Trump practices. That is commercial opportunity serving mutual interests. More important than volume is reliability. This is where Canadian advantage becomes overwhelming. Trump's America offers opposite of reliability. Tariffs appear and disappear based on presidential mood. Trade agreements torn up on Twitter, allies threatened with annexation, partners called national security threats, energy supply weaponized as political tool, commercial relationships destroyed for political messaging. Partners cannot plan long-term investments in an environment where rules change arbitrarily, cannot build supply chains when access might vanish based on single tweet, cannot trust commitments when agreements mean nothing tomorrow, cannot operate businesses when political chaos determines commercial decisions. Canada offers a completely different model proven over decades. Energy exports to the United States continued through trade wars, contracts honored during tariff fights, supply maintained despite political insults, delivery continued even when Washington called Canada a national security threat. Canadian energy companies shipped oil to American refineries every single day, regardless of political temperature. That consistency is now being noticed globally by every country watching energy supplies become bargaining chips. Cuban officials understand this perfectly. Track record matters more than promises. History proves reliability better than rhetoric. Canada has proven reliability. America under Trump has proven chaos. If Mexico can become an important supplier with limited volumes and shorter track record, imagine working with major producer that respects long-term agreements, producer that doesn't weaponize energy access, producer that separates commerce from political demands, producer that honors contracts regardless of which party holds power, producer that maintains relationships through disagreements. That is Canada. That is exactly what Cuba needs right now. American narrative insists Cuba is isolated and desperate. Washington analysts predict imminent collapse. Trump supporters celebrate economic starvation strategy. Reality shows something entirely different. Havana is not collapsing. Havana is diversifying, asserting right to trade freely, pushing back against claims that Venezuelan relationship was based on illicit compensation, building alternative supply chains, finding new partners, demonstrating strategic adaptation. These are not actions of government preparing to surrender. These are actions of government successfully recalibrating. Every Trump ultimatum makes Canadian alternative more attractive, not because Canada lacks national interests, not because Ottawa opposes Washington on principle, because Canada doesn't weaponize unpredictability, doesn't use commerce as coercion tool, doesn't attach political ultimatums to commercial contracts, doesn't threaten supply cutoffs for policy disagreements. Ongoing United States-Venezuela oil deal sends clear lesson to entire region. Comply with Washington's demands or watch your resources rerouted under supervision, your oil redirected to American refineries, your revenue placed under Treasury control, your sovereignty violated, your economy weaponized against your interests. Potential Canada-Cuba energy relationship would teach different lesson entirely. Reliability outlasts volatility in long-term commercial relationships. Predictability matters more than proximity when planning infrastructure. Respect for sovereignty creates better partnerships than ultimatums and threats. Commercial relationships function better than political arrangements vulnerable to sudden collapse. Trump believes this strategy showcases American strength. Reality shows it highlights American instability. And in energy markets where companies plan decades ahead, instability is most costly attribute possible. One military raid, one presidential post, one policy shift, and half your oil supply disappears. That's not security for Cuba. That's permanent vulnerability. That's exposure that can be exploited. That's dependence that guarantees compliance or collapse. Canada's approach carries no such risk. No military raids threatening suppliers, no ultimatums demanding policy changes, no conditional supply requiring political submission, just delivery according to contract, pricing according to agreement, continuity according to commercial relationship. May not be dramatic, may not generate exciting headlines, may not provide leverage for coercion, but it works for both parties. Supplier gets reliable customer, customer gets reliable supply. Both benefit from continuation, both protect relationship, both honor commitments, boring but functional, stable but effective, predictable but profitable. Timeline matters critically now. These discussions happening in real time, January 2026. Trump threatening maximum pressure daily. Maduro arrested and Venezuelan supply cut. Cuban grid stressed and blackouts mounting. Mexican supply helpful but insufficient. Perfect moment for Canada to step forward with long-term solution, demonstrates reliability when Cuba needs it most, builds relationship on foundation of mutual need, meeting mutual capability. shows that Canadian energy model offers real alternative to American coercion. Deal structure would be straightforward, long-term contract, fixed volume, 13,000 barrels per day, market pricing with quarterly adjustments, standard payment terms, regular quality specifications, delivery to Cuban ports using Canadian flag tankers or neutral flag vessels. Nothing unusual, nothing controversial, commercial transaction between sovereign nations, legal under international law, consistent with Canadian trade policy. Honors Cuban sovereignty, serves Canadian commercial interests. Washington would object loudly if deal materializes. Trump would threaten retaliation. Republican Congress would demand sanctions on Canadian companies involved. American media would condemn Cuba appeasement. Think tanks would publish papers warning about communist infiltration of Canadian energy sector. Diplomatic protests would flow. Ambassadors might be summoned. Harsh words would be exchanged at ministerial meetings. But actual consequences would be remarkably limited because economics constrains politics. The United States cannot sanction Canada without destroying own economy. Supply chains are completely integrated after decades of NAFTA and USMCA. Sanctioning Canadian companies hurts American companies equally. Trade agreement prohibits discriminatory measures. Violating USMCA would trigger wider trade war that America cannot win, given mutual dependence. Canada supplies critical imports to the United States that cannot be easily replaced. Energy, minerals, agricultural products, automotive parts, aerospace components, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing inputs, all essential for American economic function. Cutting off Canadian trade would cause immediate shortages, price spikes, supply chain failures, economic damage, politically impossible for Trump to sustain when American consumers and businesses suffer. So threats remain threats. Angry rhetoric without real consequences. Actual sanctions never materialize because costs exceed benefits. Canada proceeds with Cuba trade. Washington fumes publicly. Media criticizes. Congress holds hearings. But no effective mechanism exists to stop it. Canadian sovereignty means making own trade decisions. Cuba trade is legal, profitable, strategic. No American veto exists over Canadian commercial relationships with third countries. Pattern already proven through China engagement. Trump objected strenuously to Canada-China tariff deal, called it betrayal of North American partnership, threatened undefined consequences, demanded Canada reverse course. Nothing happened. No sanctions imposed. No trade restrictions implemented. No real punishment beyond angry tweets. Canada-Cuba energy trade would follow exact same pattern. Trump anger, media criticism, congressional theater, but no effective mechanism to prevent it. Canadian sovereignty remains intact. Cuban sovereignty defended. Commercial relationship proceeds. American leverage proves illusory. Precedent matters enormously beyond bilateral relationship. If Canada supplies Cuba successfully, other countries notice. European refiners might sell diesel to Cuba. Asian traders might supply petroleum products. Latin American producers might engage commercially. American isolation strategy collapses entirely. Cuba enters normal commercial relationships with diversified global suppliers. Washington loses coercive leverage accumulated over 65 years of embargo policy. Cannot threaten Cuban grid collapse if Cuba has diversified suppliers in multiple regions. Cannot weaponize energy access if commercial alternatives exist from willing partners. Entire sanctions architecture designed to maintain Cuban isolation weakens structurally. That represents strategic defeat for Washington, not military defeat. Economic and diplomatic defeat. Demonstrates limits of American power in multipolar world. Shows that pressure creates adaptation, not submission. Proves that allies will pursue own interests even when Washington objects. Validates multipolar trading system where American approval is not required for commercial transactions. This is Trump's nightmare scenario. Everything he has fought against, allies acting independently, adversaries finding alternatives, American dominance declining, all resulting directly from Trump's own actions. Overplayed hand on Venezuela, applied maximum pressure before building alternative compliance mechanisms, gave Cuba no choice but to seek alternatives immediately, made adaptation necessary through threats, then expressed shock when adaptation succeeded. Venezuelan example proves the point. Political arrangement worked for years, then collapsed overnight when military operations succeeded. President arrested, supply severed instantly. Everything Cuba depended on vanished without consultation or transition period. That is political arrangement vulnerability. Someone makes decision in Caracas or Washington and supply disappears. Cuba left scrambling to survive. Commercial relationship offers protection from such shocks. Contracts have legal force. Cancellation requires cause defined in agreement. Disputes go to arbitration under international frameworks. Legal structures protect both parties from arbitrary decisions. Cannot be severed on presidential whim. Canadian company cannot stop supplying Cuba because Trump tweets angrily or issues threats. Contract is contract. Law is law. Commercial obligation continues regardless of political pressure. Cuba, learning that lesson painfully through Venezuelan collapse, will apply lesson going forward. Future supply relationships will be commercial, not political. Multiple suppliers, not single vulnerable source. Contracts, not personal agreements. Legal frameworks, not political alignments. Diversification, not dependence. Canadian model fits perfectly. Energy infrastructure creates long-term relationships lasting decades. Once supply arrangements established, they persist through political changes. Tanker routes optimized for efficiency, loading procedures standardized for reliability, quality specifications agreed and implemented, payment systems integrated and tested, personnel trained and experienced, relationships built and valued. Switching suppliers involves significant costs and operational risks. Inertia strongly favors continuation of working arrangements. If Canada begins supplying Cuba now during crisis, relationship likely continues for decades, long after Trump, long after Carney, long after current governments in both countries have changed multiple times. Infrastructure creates facts on ground, physical reality, commercial relationships, legal commitments, all outlast political circumstances that created initial opportunity. From Havana's perspective, current crisis ultimately proved blessing despite immediate pain. Forced diversification that was needed decades ago ended dangerous dependence on single politically aligned supplier, destroyed vulnerable arrangements subject to external pressure, replaced with multiple commercial relationships reducing overall vulnerability, created genuine energy security through diversification, built structural resilience through multiple independent supply sources, demonstrated sovereignty through independent commercial action, proved resistance can succeed against superpower pressure, showed that American coercion can be absorbed and overcome with strategic planning, validated strategy of principled opposition to Washington's demands. Every pressure point Trump applied actually strengthened Cuban resolve rather than breaking it. Every threat made submission more unacceptable politically. Every ultimatum made resistance more necessary strategically. Every display of American aggression made Canadian reliability more valuable commercially. Trump achieved opposite of stated intentions, meant to break Cuban government, instead strengthened Cuban sovereignty, meant to force submission to American demands, instead provoked successful resistance, meant to demonstrate American power, instead revealed American impotence, meant to isolate Cuba from alternatives, instead drove Cuba toward new partnerships. Strategic disaster on every measurable level. Canada recognizes historic opportunity emerging from crisis, positioning as reliable alternative to American chaos, demonstrating that energy relationships can function without political interference, showing that commerce works better than coercion for sustainable partnerships, proving that respect for sovereignty creates better long-term relationships than ultimatums and threats, building global reputation as dependable partner precisely when other powers weaponize relationships, creating commercial value while defending sovereignty principles, pursuing Canadian national interests while supporting global norms, perfect alignment of values and interests, exactly what foreign policy should achieve. Better to stand with Cuba defending sovereignty against coercion. Better to prove commercial relationships function without political interference. Better to demonstrate energy supply can be reliable without ultimatums attached. Better to show entire hemisphere that alternatives to American dominance exist and function. Better to be Canada, reliable, consistent, respectful, boring, than to be America under Trump, chaotic, threatening, unpredictable, dangerous. Cuban choice is clear when framed this way. Hemisphere's choice becoming clearer daily. World's choice crystallizing as pattern repeats. Energy relationships reveal everything about international partnerships. Who can be trusted over decades? Who weaponizes access for political leverage? Who honors commitments through disagreements? Who issues ultimatums demanding submission? Who provides reliability enabling planning? Who creates chaos preventing investment? who respects sovereignty as principle, who demands submission as price. Canada's record speaks clearly across decades. Consistent supply regardless of political climate, contracts honored through government changes, relationships maintained through policy disagreements, no weaponization of commercial ties, no political ultimatums attached to energy sales, no interference with sovereign decisions, just reliable commercial partnerships between equals. That is what Cuba needs desperately right now. That is what Canada offers uniquely. Match is perfect. Timing is optimal. Decision is straightforward. 13,000 barrels daily. Closes remaining gap. Secures grid operation. Maintains national sovereignty. Defeats coercion strategy. Proves resistance succeeds. Validates that alternatives exist. That is the story. That is the moment. That is the choice facing both countries. Canada steps forward while Trump shouts. Reliability defeats aggression in long run. Commerce overcomes coercion through persistence. Sovereignty survives pressure through adaptation. Cuban lights stay on. Canadian principles proven effective. American leverage eliminated permanently. If this analysis resonates with you, make sure to subscribe to Canada Unfiltered. We're here breaking down the stories that matter, the power shifts no one talks about, and the moments that reshape how nations relate to each other.